So I think this is draft number 28 for you. Is that right?
Yes, it is. Yeah.
28.
Yeah.
First decentralized. So, how does that kind of change the equation, the dynamics of the whole weekend?
It really. I mean, we had it kind of during COVID also.
Yeah.
So it really doesn't change it that much in the sense that how we approach things is no different. But you don't have the same atmosphere of being on the draft floor with all the other teams and the media and all the parents and the stands. But as far as how we approach it, it's the same. You just don't have everything off the floor. Yeah.
Okay. Good, bad, indifferent. How do you feel about it?
We can ask in a couple of days. We'll give you a little better answer. We'll see how. I mean, it gives you more freedom to talk. When you're on the draft floor, that next table's right here. With scouts and other teams and that. So, I guess it gives us a lot more freedom to speak freely and talk about things. But yeah, we'll have a better idea after Saturday.
Raise your hand if you have a question.
How do you kind of see the top end of this draft shaping out? Obviously, it doesn't involve you guys for the first time in a few years, but just sort of overall, how do you see this draft?
I'm sorry, could you say that a little louder?
How do you see the top end of this draft shaping up? Obviously, you guys aren't involved in that.
Oh, the top end?
Years, but
Yeah, no, I think it's like most years. There's some quality players for sure that are going to get drafted earlier in the draft. Yeah, I think the top end's fairly good. I think the first round actually is going to be pretty good. Yeah.
And I know that, obviously, as Bailey said, those aren't players that you guys are going to be able to draft. But is it clear that there's a consensus top three and then sort of a lot of uncertainty after that at the top of this draft?
I guess it's hard for me to read what other teams are doing. But I think there's probably a lot of the same names are probably going to go in the top 10 or 12 picks. What that order is, I don't know. I think it depends on other teams. But I think you'll probably see the same, probably, like I said, that first layer of players, that first 10 or 12 names will probably be pretty similar. There could always be somebody else, like I said, go ahead of that, but I don't see that. It's just probably the order of it.
Looking at the depth chart and how many prospects you guys have gotten over the last few years, is there a desire to maybe look at things positionally at 27, or is it still the approach of the best player available?
No, we always take the best player available. And I know that question comes up all the time, but we really do. I mean, if you went by position, I think you run that risk of saying, "Oh, let's take a defenseman this year." We're a little light on defense, and then a forward goes and he ends up being a much better player. You're probably kicking yourself after for not doing that. So, I mean, the one year it was really close, I think, as far as the players, but there were a lot of goaltenders, and we ended up taking Varlamov in the first round. We took Michael Neuwirth in the second round, and we were going to take Steve Mason, I think, in the third round, and we had discussed that, and George and I, and it was like, we already got a couple goalies, but looking back at it, we should have taken Steve Mason again. He ended up making it. It would have given us another prospect that either to play on our team or you can use for trades. So we've always tried to stick with taking the best player available, unless it's, like I said, you're splitting hairs, and we really thought there was a strong year that year for goaltenders. So that would probably be the exception of the 27 drafts that I've been through.
following up on that, hypothetically, if you were splitting hairs, do you see this class as heavier on forwards, heavier on defensemen? If you're picking between two guys at 27 that you like equally, would you go forward defenseman, hypothetically?
No, we'll take the best player, but I think the top of the draft, probably the first 30 or 40 picks, probably the first 40 picks is probably pretty heavy on forwards, probably even more so on centers. I think there'll be a lot of centers go in the first round. A little lighter on goaltenders. Not to say there aren't good goaltenders, but probably the number of goaltenders this year compared to other years is probably a little bit light. Same with defensemen, probably in the first 40 picks. There's probably not quite as many defensemen that would go, so I would say pretty strong in centers and forwards, wingers, probably in those first 40 picks. And then a little later on, I think there's a lot more defensemen that'll be drafted. But if I was to kind of do the top 40 for you, it would be lots of centers, not a lot of defensemen, and goaltenders like I said, it's pretty light, but there are some good ones.
You guys had a pretty aggressive offseason last year, but you still ended up taking that first round pick. Do you anticipate any chance that you guys trade that pick, or are you anticipating making it?
Sorry, we would.
Would you make the
Any chance you trade the pick?
Any chance we trade the pick?
Yeah.
first round?
What are you doing to me? I've been working all these months trying to. Yeah, there's always a chance that a pick could get moved. And, when you're on the amateur side, you love to make picks. That's your job. That's what you do as a group. But if you're making a trade to acquire an asset that you think is going to improve your team and put you over the hump and give you a chance to win a cup, then by all means, you go with that. I mean, and we've had years where we've had 3 first-round picks, and we've had years we've had no first-round picks. But to answer that question right now, yeah, it depends what other teams throw at us, I guess, in the next 3 or 4 days to see whether you're moving that pick or not. But for me, we'd like to have those picks, and yep.
Following up on Katie's question there, cap's going up. A lot of teams are trying to replicate what you guys did, rebuilding on the fly. What do you see kind of going down league-wide here over the next 5-6 days?
So the second part was, what do we?
What do you see or any league-wide trends you're anticipating here over the next 5-6 days?
Yeah, I don't know if people are going to, replicate what we did. I mean, trying to draft, trying to improve your team on the fly. Teams do it different ways, I guess, but I really don't know what the future will be that way. It'd probably be a better question for Chris Patrick or, Brian Sotheby more on the pro side. Yep.
A lot of teams are holding on to their picks for next year. I know you're focused on this draft right now, but what's the excitement about next year's draft, about 2026, and sort of the depth of talent available in next year's draft?
Yeah, I would think that I usually think all drafts end up being kind of similar. At the end of the day, there's usually about 52 players play 250 games or more. And some of those might come from earlier in the draft, some might come from a little bit later, but I think this year's draft could be a little bit lighter than some years. So I think that's why you'll see people maybe keeping their picks, for next year or 2 years from now. Yeah. But I mean, they're 5 years from now, we always look back and sometimes we think, well, this is going to be a great draft, and or this is a little bit weak draft, and then always seems to equal out as far as the number of players that make it.
Are there any characteristics like speed, playmaking, pass, anything with this class that particularly stands out to you among all the forwards and defensemen available?
We just got back from doing the combine and the interviews, and it was probably the best group of kids we've ever done as far as the interviews. I think there's a lot of really high-end character kids in this year's draft. Yeah, it was amazing actually how their self-evaluations are really good. Sometimes you're asked in those interviews, when do you think you'll be able to play in the NHL? And it's, next year. And you're like, next year. Depending on who you are, we might need a little more reality here.
Yeah.
But a lot of the kids were, I think I got to go back and play college for a couple of years or junior for a couple of years, and then I might need a year or two in the American League. And, I was like, wow, really good self-evaluation. It seemed a lot better this year as far as that goes.
If I can follow up on that too, does that maybe make it harder to, or maybe make you want to, I want to hold on to this pick, make the front office be like, I don't necessarily.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's an indication of the character, where you're probably going to get players that are, have good character and probably going to be really willing to do on and off the ice, to make themselves the best they can be. But that probably stuck out from the combine. It was just seemed like a really solid group of kids and realistic, like I said, with those self-evaluations.
Go ahead, Tom.
With a year to look back now, if you look at your 2024 draft, you're pretty happy with how that went. Even better than maybe what you thought afterwards, some of the kids that you got last year.
Yeah, we felt really good when we left the draft. And then the way a lot of them played was really, really satisfying for us. When you take, Protas and Matiko in the third round, and the guys had a real like for them, but then to see what they accomplished, as far as Protoss and the year he had in the Ontario League, and Matiko's performance in the World Junior, especially the Canada game, and Mugli played really well. You look at Hudson. I don't know if he could have had a better year as a freshman at Boston University. Parasak's year was good. Team wasn't as good as it was the year before, where they had a contending team. He probably played too much. Him and a few other forwards on that team. I think the coach really shortened the bench in a lot of games, and it was probably a little bit of a fatigue factor for him later in the year. But honestly, we thought we had a good draft, and so far, I think are correct in our evaluations and how they did this year.
What do you expect? We don't know what's going to happen with the NCAA and junior players and all that, but that's going to be a domino effect that's going to affect teams for a long time. What do you think that's going to do to change the landscape of the pipeline to the NHL? A lot of junior kids going to college and late bloomer possibilities and all that.
Great question. I wish I had the answers to that. I guess it'll probably shake itself out in the next 3 or 4 years, but originally I thought, okay, so they're all going to go play junior, major junior. They'll play when they're 16, get drafted when they're 17, play when they're probably 18 and 19, or maybe when they're 19, if they don't sign and go pro when they're 20, then they'll go to college and, continue to develop and play there. And then now there's a lot of players from junior that are going to go to college that I thought were going to remain in junior hockey. So it's the landscape has definitely changed for sure. If we take a player out of the CHL, we have 2 years to sign him. If we take a player out of the USHL or high school, we have 4 years. So I'm assuming that's going to change where everybody will get 4 years. I haven't heard anything officially, and if that happens, I guess that would make a little more sense for development. Like an example would be you would take a player out of the CHL, maybe he plays an 18, 19-year-old. Now you want to sign him, but maybe he's not quite ready for Hershey. And so is it better to have him in Hershey and have him healthy scratched for a third of the games, or is it better for him to go play at North Dakota for 2 years, and then sign and go to Hershey? So, I see a lot of positives too, but I didn't anticipate the number of junior players that I think are going to go on to school. Some have already committed, said they are, but I guess we'll find out and see when it happens. How it changes the college landscape, I'm not sure. Because some of the names I've seen of some of the really good players that are going to certain schools, it almost seems like there's a possibility it could widen that gap a little bit between the good schools, and they seem to be attracting right now more of the upper kind of junior players. And I those are decisions that the players are making with their advisors or their agents, and we'll see how it works out. Like Victoria was sort of interesting. Verhoff, who's a 16-year-old last year, who's going to be a very good draft pick next year. He's going as a 17-year-old in North Dakota, supposedly with Reshne, who's going to get drafted this year, and that really hurts Victoria. They go from probably being a team that had a chance to win the Western Hockey League to maybe being a little out of the picture as far as trying to win it. So I don't know. We'll see. You want 17-year-olds in college? I don't know. Celebrini, yes, he was exceptional. It didn't hurt him at all. And so I don't have any real answers for that. But I'm curious to see how a couple of years from now, what it kind of looks like, the landscape. Yeah.
Ross, from your experience here over the last 2 decades, what's the better development path for your top prospects? To stay in the WHL and score 130 points, or go play against grown men in the Big Ten or ECAC?
Yeah, that's a tough question. It really is, because not every draft pick is the same, Yeah. So for Andrew Crystal to go back and to play as a 19-year-old in Spokane and win the scoring title and, go right to the league final, and I don't think it could have been better for him. It was an exceptional year for him, So I think for a lot of those players, there's nothing wrong with being back in junior and excelling, and being with your age group. And sometimes I wonder about a 17-year-old and then a 25-year-old in college, or a 24-year-old in college. That's a big gap. You know, that's a huge. But a lot of it comes down to probably the team that you're with and the university that you're with. You know, there's some really good college programs and there's some really good junior programs, and there's some others that maybe aren't so good in both levels. So, but I mean, for us, probably the most important thing and the biggest thing, and I think what we do really, really well is our development team. You know, Steve Richmond and Ole Kolzig and Jim Slater and, of course, Brooks Orpik. That's where the key is, to have a good, really good development team, and we do. So, I mean, I think that's. But the junior college, it's probably an individual thing, you know. Yeah, I mean, it's great programs in both. I mean, one hand, some people may say you played too many games in junior, and the other hand, some people say you don't play enough games in college. You know, you can have all these endless discussions, I guess, but
I was looking at the list, Ross, of the players over the last 2 months from the CHL who have committed to NCAA, which, you know, obviously didn't happen before. I'm thinking the NCAA might be one of the best leagues in the world here, especially for younger players in the next 2 or 3
yeah, if they all show up, I mean,
Yeah,
that'll
no,
be
that's great.
it'll be interesting that way. I guess from a scouting point of view, if players like young Verhoff in Victoria, if there's more kids going to college that are younger, then I guess that'll change the dynamics for me and some of my scouts in the sense of how many college games they're going to now as compared to in the future. You know, because most of the kids are already drafted out of high school, drafted out of the USHL, or they're still in major junior and get drafted. So we could be seeing more college games in the future if that's the way that this is trending. You know.
I guess Ryan Leonard's kind of saw the big jump from college to the NHL when he came in after his college season. How much do you think that's going to help him next season? And do you anticipate him being a development camp next week?
Yeah, I think it'll help Ryan tremendously. You know, that experience of getting in there and playing those games, and then the opportunity of playing in playoff games also, because the playoff games that's a totally different animal. You kind of have your preseason, you know, regular season, and then things really get ramped up in the playoffs. And I think that's a kind of a big part that makes our sport so unique in that way as compared to a lot of other sports. So for him to get that experience, I just think it really speeds up his development.
Is he going to be here next week, or you don't know yet? Is Ryan going to be at dev camp, development camp?
I don't know if he will be or not. I'm not sure if he will. Leaning, I think, towards not being there, but I haven't talked to Steve Richmond for a while.